His worst critics would say Trump's 12 months in office have been 12 months too long. They say his instinct to fight, to divide, to disrupt and insult have redefined what it means to be presidential. He's pushed boundaries in ways never seen before. He's been offensive and shocking, and accused of being racist after being quoted as describing African countries as shitholes.
No, I'm not a racist. I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed. That I can tell you.
Donald Trump is remaking the office of the President of the United States, prodding institutions and smashing conventions. He's also shown a casual disregard for the truth, sacked people at will, hired members of his family for key White House positions, and publicly derided the role of former close friends like Steve Bannon in Michael Wolff's recent book titled Fire and Fury. Michael Wolff is a total loser who made up stories in order to sell this really boring and untruthful book. He used sloppy Steve Bannon, who cried when he got fired and begged for his job. Now sloppy Steve has been dumped like a dog by almost everyone. Too bad. ABC News described his presidency as part reality show, civic lesson and comedy. But Trump has also been getting some things done. His backers point to the economy, which has been growing. Unemployment is down, wages are up. He snubbed allies like NATO, warning them to fork out more on their defense instead of Washington bearing the burden. He's taken on the trade deficit with China, demanding that Beijing do more to correct the imbalance. His public slamming of Pakistan for its lies and deceit and outlining a conditions-based Afghanistan strategy has been widely welcomed. Despite the public show of bonhomie between him and Narendra Modi at the White House last June, Trump is viewed as transactional and unpredictable, requiring South Bloc to proceed cautiously and balance its interests. But let's go back to 2017 to Trump's inaugural address on January 20th, which many see as a diatribe against past presidents and especially Barack Obama and the Washington establishment which had scorned him.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land.
And his exclusive view of America.
We will bring back our jobs. We will bring back our borders. We will bring back our wealth. And we will bring back our dreams. We will build new roads and highways and bridges and airports and tunnels and railways all across our wonderful nation. We will get our people off of welfare and back to work, rebuilding our country with American hands and American labor. We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American.
But the very next day, demonstrations and protests swept America. Hundreds of thousands of women marched through the streets of major cities, denouncing and mocking their new president. They found him misogynistic and insulting of women. Banners and placards rejected his election.
I'm for women's rights, period. Because I'm old and I'm not going to last forever, and I want to get a word in before I die.
My wife and I have a 2-year-old son, and we're really worried about the future.
Reports said there were more people at these marches than during the Trump inauguration. The marchers underscored America's deep divide. Trump supporters talk of how the stock market has risen under him, of the Christian values he upholds. His critics have cited his abrasive comments and tweets, his propensity to shamelessly lie, and his bullying larger-than-life persona. For others, especially non-white minorities, Trump winning the nomination for the presidency in November 2016 seems to have opened the doors to racism and white xenophobia. Reports by the Southern Poverty Law Center documented more than 80 incidents of hate crime on the evening Trump won the nomination. These included Nazi swastikas and graffiti spray-painted in Philadelphia. Trump scrawled on the door of a Muslim prayer room in New York University. A gay pride flag was burnt in Rochester, in New York. The effigy of a black man was hung above the entrance to a coffee shop in Alabama. Heidi Byridge, who directs the intelligence project for the Southern Poverty Law Center, recalled being inundated with hate crime reports when she entered her office the next day. She said, and I quote, "You just don't see a day in which 80 or 90 people are reporting terrible things happening to them. That is just really, really rare."
15 feet to her car.
Legal experts claim that Trump's language and rhetoric during the election campaign gave license to many on the right-wing fringe to demonize and attack non-whites. Here's a statement from Trump's office where he confirms describing Mexicans as rapists. He said, and I quote, "When Mexico, meaning the Mexican government, sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. They're bringing those problems to us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. Likewise, tremendous infectious disease is pouring across the border." And then there was this gem.
Tremendous drugs are pouring into the United States at levels that nobody's ever seen before. This happened over the last 3 to 4 years in particular. The wall will stop much of the drugs from pouring into this country and poisoning our youth.
Hispanics fear the worst, warned Cristina Jimenez Moreta, executive director of the immigrants' rights group United We Dream. Our community is under siege, and we may be entering an era where our very existence is an act of civil disobedience. But many blacks believe it is their community which is bearing the brunt of Trump's racism and the resultant violence. In November 2017, there were attacks on 5 black churches in New Jersey alone. A March 2017 university poll saw 87% of blacks say there is a lot of discrimination against them. Only 49% of whites felt the same way. 88% of blacks said the country needs to change if their community is to have equal rights with whites. A Pew Research poll found 43% blacks skeptical of any positive change. Trump's comments in the wake of a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville in which one woman died did not help.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time.
To be fair, he has tried to reach out to the black community, meeting heads of black colleges and universities in February last year, and later chairing a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus where he promised help. More recently, he spoke at the memorial ceremony for the late black civil rights leader Martin Luther King.
He stirred the hearts of our people to recognize the dignity written in every human soul. Today we celebrate Dr. King for standing up for the self-evident truth Americans hold so dear, that no matter what the color of our skin or the place of our birth, we are all created equal by God.
Hispanics don't appear to have been so lucky. 200,000 Salvadorans who were granted temporary residence permits in the US after the 2001 earthquake have been told they must leave by September next year unless they can legalize their immigrant status. He has threatened to tear up the North American Free Trade Agreement, but is under pressure to stick to it. Muslims too have been targeted. In fact, US media reports say Trump has stoked fears of Muslim immigrants and refugees fleeing the Islamic State. He's referred to them as Trojan horses, even telling Yahoo News in an interview, and I quote, "We cannot take a chance that the people coming over here are going to be ISIS affiliated." And then at a rally in South Carolina in December 2015, he spelt it out.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
One of his first executive orders was a travel ban on Muslims from certain Muslim-majority countries entering America. This was later modified on court orders and has been extended to 2 non-Muslim-majority countries. In recent months, he retweeted 3 inflammatory videos from a British far-right account full of anti-Muslim content. Add to that the discord over DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which gave around 700,000 minors the right to live, study and work in the US, but did not give them a path to become American citizens or permanent residents. Trump has stopped the program and beginning March 6th, will begin deporting them unless Congress is able to come up with a solution which ties in with his own views on immigration reform. It doesn't help that most of them are from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala and Honduras. Let's leave that aside and look at something which even Americans otherwise unhappy with Trump are cheering: the economy. The US economy is growing. It added 2 million jobs in 2017. In the month of December alone, 148,000 jobs were added. Wages grew at 2.5%, unemployment remained at 4.1%. Key industries that gained were construction and manufacturing. In fact, construction and manufacturing were the 2 key sectors Trump targeted for jobs growth, and they've not let him down. Although retail stores lost 67,000 jobs, with people preferring to shop online, the feel-good mood was evident in a university poll which showed that 66% of those surveyed described the economy as excellent or good. It was promptly tweeted by Donald Trump. It didn't matter that the same poll showed that economic growth has not translated into more support for Trump. His approval ratings are now down to 36%. A staggering 59% disapprove of him. Between 34 and 63% believe he's not honest. 59% say he has no leadership skills. Around the same number do not think he cares for the average American. Many Americans seem to credit former President Barack Obama for the economic turnaround. Others question the massive trade deficit with China, now at $340 billion. Trump has blown hot and cold on Beijing, from threatening a trade war to heaping praise on China's President Xi Jinping. Bizarrely, he even blamed his own country for the deficit. He said, and I quote, "I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for taking advantage of another country for the benefit of its own citizens? I give China great credit. But in actuality, I do blame past US administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow. We have to fix this because it just doesn't work. It is just not sustainable." Does that mean tearing up treaties and agreements? He's walked out of the climate change treaty, although in recent days he's hinted he could return to it. But on trade, he's been belligerent. He's already scuttled the Trans-Pacific Partnership and is now threatening to tear up the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with Europe. The North American Free Trade Area is in his sights, notwithstanding warnings from US trade and industry. He even threatened to undo a free trade agreement with South Korea signed in 2007. He believes it's unfair to the US, unfair to US workers, and has pointed to the $28 billion trade deficit with Seoul. Trump has even taken aim at the $24 billion trade deficit with India. US commerce industry officials have indicated India's exports of steel, gems and jewelry, automobiles and components, food and leather could be potential target for restrictions unless New Delhi took steps to reduce the deficit. It's a bit of a wonder how the $300 billion plus trade deficit with China is less of an issue, while $24 billion with India or $28 billion with South Korea are at the receiving end. But that's Trump. It fuels the suspicion that the president, for all his talk of divorcing himself from his businesses, has not walked the talk. Is the refusal to take on China over its $300 billion plus deficit linked to his family's business interests?
His family holding important positions in the White House is nepotism, pure and simple. And there's nothing indirect or hidden about it. When President Xi of China was visiting with President Trump in Florida, at the same time the Chinese government gave his daughter Ivanka certain licenses to conduct businesses in China, and that's purely nepotism. There are many other respects in which his companies and those of his family are benefiting indirectly or sometimes even directly from his time in office. So the nepotism is bad for his presidency, bad for his country, and also bad because by keeping his relatives in high influential positions in the White House, he has people who are really politically incompetent and incompetent in terms of foreign policy, having a big say in helping to construct his policies.
Others differ, saying Trump does see China as a threat.
In the latest national security strategy that has been brought out by the US government, there is a clear recognition and articulation of the fact that China has exploited its access to the international economic system and has benefited from that and is now changing the rules of the game, be it in the South China Sea, be it in terms of nuclear cooperation with Pakistan. And therefore, there is a recognition, a more fact-based recognition of the challenge that China poses.
The US Commerce Department could open the door to punitive measures against imported Chinese steel and aluminium on national security grounds, while a highly sensitive probe into intellectual property theft and cyber espionage is expected to be out soon. The South China Morning Post warned that Trump has put the regulatory instruments in place for a trade war against China. The consensus in Washington is that China plays unfairly. Its unbridled industrial policy is dangerous to China's trading partners. It is also dangerous to global supply chains and business models built on fair competition. The danger is that the US is going into this alone, since Trump has been attacking South Korea, Japan and Germany for their so-called economic misdeeds. Ideally, he should have built a common front with his allies and then taken on the Chinese. In fact, the South China Morning Post notes that Trump should never have left the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In doing so, he has left the field open to Beijing.
Yes, Trump is definitely making America more isolationist, both in terms of his statements, which denigrate foreign countries, which denigrate foreign populations, and in terms of just consciously pulling back from certain parts of the world and engagement in terms of trade, in terms of exchange of peoples and ideas, in terms of foreign aid. He's really getting less involved with the world at a time which flies in the face of the U.S. historical role, even though sometimes the U.S. has been hypocritical. It's also been sincere sometimes when it's supported democracy, self-determination, human rights, and it really is hurting us in terms of a more isolationist America is a stronger China, a stronger Russia, and even in terms of alienating some populations, indirectly strengthening terrorist organizations around the world.
On terrorism, Trump has won kudos for his approach to defeating the Islamic State. But in the bargain, he appears to have yielded ground in a sensitive region to Russia. Today, Moscow has re-emerged as an important player in the Arab world, with none other than the Saudi king acknowledging that by visiting Moscow. Vladimir Putin is being courted from Tehran to Baghdad, Damascus to Istanbul. Worse still, the Mueller probe into Russian meddling in the US elections has prevented Trump from building a relationship with Putin.
This warming has not happened. Whatever inclination the White House might have had on it, the real understanding of Russia's hostile intentions and essentially anti-US disposition is well understood in the US Congress.
Trump has done better with his conditions-based Afghanistan strategy, which will see US troops there until the conflict is settled. But a suspension of aid to Pakistan for its support of terrorism has been attempted before and failed.
It's an interesting step forward that he's cut off some U.S. aid to Pakistan, but on the other hand, he's locked the U.S. into dependence on Pakistan in terms of supplying Afghanistan, supplying our troops in Afghanistan. One of the many problems with his policy regarding South Asia is that instead of being conciliatory towards Iran or exploring possible avenues for cooperation with Iran, which shares some interest with the U.S. in terms of battling terrorism in Afghanistan, he's done his best to alienate Iran and made us more dependent on Pakistan in the process. It's conceivable, not definite, but conceivable that a more conciliatory approach, following on President Obama's more conciliatory approach, could have opened up Iran as a route for supplying Afghanistan. Instead, we're dependent on Pakistan, and despite what President Trump does and says, we remain dependent, and that really can hurt our South Asia strategy in ways that hurts India as well.
Narendra Modi touched base with Trump last April in the White House, an event great on atmospherics and good for the Indian Prime Minister. Trump may have deliberately intended it so, for 3 months later his Afghanistan strategy demanded a lot from Pakistan in terms of curbing terrorism. For now, the pressure is on Pakistan, but the US has been down this route before and there's no telling which way things could go. He could demand that India send troops to Afghanistan, and if the response is no, which is most likely, will the India connect cease to matter? Trump's saber-rattling on North Korea has deepened fears he may be readying for the unthinkable, a military strike.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
Media reports have suggested the US could hit the North's nuclear facilities, bomb and missile-making locations, laboratories and other targets. The North's Kim Jong-un is expected to retaliate, which is probably why the South's Moon Jae-in has already struck a deal on a joint team to represent the two Koreas for the Winter Olympics next month. It's as good insurance as any. Will 2018 see Trump temper some of his worst instincts? The American people have in successive opinion polls indicated he should tweet less and react less to every remark about him in public. Others say he should stop making false or misleading statements, listen more to his advisors, and reach out to a divided America. The larger question is whether it is in Trump's nature to listen to people or even good advice. It's not clear if his daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner have any influence over him. For that matter, their own understanding of politics, whether domestic or international, is a mystery. Some time ago, when Michael Wolff's book on Trump hit the stands, it was reported that Ivanka was considering a run for the presidency. Could Trump be impeached? That depends on any oversteps or missteps. It would also depend on what the Mueller probe comes up with.
The allegations about his involvement with the Russians are very credible. For one thing, the general background is that there have been all of these meetings that were covered up, that were lied about with Russians, and that in and of itself is suspicious. But even beyond that, we have specific incidents that have taken place that really raise big questions about his engagement or his family's or campaign's engagement with the Russians. His son-in-law, and campaign chair in 2016 took a meeting with Russian operatives who were explicitly offering negative information on Hillary Clinton. That's cooperating with a foreign power to undermine the legitimacy and credibility of U.S. elections. His son-in-law tried to arrange a secret back channel for communications with the Russians, going through Russian intelligence, going through Russian embassies, that the U.S. government would not have otherwise known about or involved with. That's extremely suspicious. And there's yet more information that will very likely come out as the president, as the special counsel's investigation, Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump and Russia ties goes forward. So yes, the allegations are very credible. There's much more that may well come out yet.
Republicans, despite everything, are also trying to see how they can use the Trump presidency to advance their own agenda. Now, if after the 2018 elections, the majority changes in one or more of the houses, then we are dealing with a different situation, and people will have to assess then. But short of that, and unless he's indicted by the investigation that is going on, impeachment doesn't really look a very realistic possibility at this stage.
For now, Trump can savor his first year, but there are clouds on the horizon. His adversaries are growing, his popularity ratings have dipped alarmingly, and the nation stands polarized. 2018 could be Trump's year to set things right if he wants to.